I want you to think about your life as a complex computer algorithm.
Right. A highly predictable sequence of events.
Exactly. You wake up and a very specific sequence of code begins to execute. You check your phone, you start the coffee, you lock the deadbolt, you drive a specific route.
And we rely on the absolute, unquestionable predictability of those actions to structure society.
We do. But when you step into the world of missing persons investigations, you realize how fragile that algorithm actually is. I mean, the absence of a mundane action like failing to send the exact morning text message you send every single day, it is not just a glitch.
No, it is a system failure.
Right. It becomes a piercing alarm.
That concept of the algorithm, that is precisely how forensic timelines are constructed. Missing persons cases are not just about finding physical clues. They are fundamentally built on measuring deviations from established baselines.
Because you are looking for what is missing.
Exactly. Investigators do not merely look at what happened. They meticulously document what failed to happen. When an individual has an incredibly stable behavioral baseline, any deviation becomes a highly significant data point.
I see.
The sharper the deviation, well, the more immediately investigators can isolate the precise window of anomaly. We look for the exact moment the code stopped running.
And that brings us to our focus for this intensive exploration. We are bringing you into a comprehensive analysis of a case that has required law enforcement to measure those exact deviations for 2 decades.
The 2006 disappearance of 24-year-old finance manager Jennifer Kesse from Orlando, Florida.
Right. We are working from a compilation of chronological investigative records, forensic reports, and the highly significant 2025 updates provided by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
The FDLE.
Yes, the FDLE. Our mission here is to reconstruct the impossibly narrow window of time in which Jennifer vanished. We are going to analyze the mechanical and mathematical anomalies of the infamous surveillance footage.
Which is still studied in forensic courses today.
Absolutely. And we will examine the groundbreaking DNA evidence that has recently redefined the parameters of this investigation. But I want you to evaluate your own morning routine right now.
That is a good exercise.
Think about the first hour of your day. If you did not send that one text you send every single morning, or if your car did not pull out of the driveway at the exact minute it always does, how long would it take for someone in your life to actually notice?
For the vast majority of people, a missed text or a delayed arrival might be ignored for an entire day.
Yeah, people get busy.
Right. You might justify it as a dead battery, a forgotten charger, or a sudden morning meeting. But to understand the terrifying anomaly of Jennifer Kesse's disappearance, we must first establish exactly who she was up to January 2006.
We have to build that baseline.
Exactly. Her life was characterized by a rigid adherence to routine and profound responsibility. She was born on May 20, 1981 in New Jersey, and she later graduated from Vivian Gaither High School in Tampa.
And she stayed in Florida for college, right?
She did. She attended the University of Central Florida, graduating in 2003 with a degree in finance. By age 24, her life was thoroughly established and meticulously organized.
Let us look at the structure of her life at that exact moment. She was a finance manager at Central Florida Investments timeshare company in Ocoee.
A high-level corporate position for someone her age.
Very impressive. And she had recently purchased her own condominium in Orlando. Plus, she had just returned from a vacation in St. Croix with her boyfriend.
The timeline shows she stayed at his house on Sunday night, then drove straight to her office on Monday, January 23.
So you have a portrait of someone whose life operated with zero margin for error, like a tightly wound clock. Every single variable, her career trajectory, her communication with her family, her romantic relationship, was perfectly in sync.
And that level of stability presents immense friction against standard police operating procedures.
How so?
Well, when an adult goes missing, law enforcement historically defaults to the theory of a voluntary disappearance.
Because they are legally allowed to just leave.
Precisely. Legally speaking, adults possess the absolute right to walk away from their lives, change their names, and sever contact. However, a baseline this stable immediately contradicts the voluntary disappearance theory.
It just does not fit the data.
Right. When a person has just invested in real estate, maintains consistent and affectionate daily communication with their parents, and returns seamlessly to a high-level corporate job immediately after a vacation, the statistical probability of a voluntary, unannounced departure drops to near zero.
It is about the digital and physical footprint. The tight timeline of that Monday evening illustrates how investigators track that footprint.
And every action she took left a trace.
Exactly. Let us analyze the mechanics of her schedule. She leaves work at 6 p.m. At 6:15 p.m. while driving, she calls her parents.
This is her first time returning to her own condominium since leaving for her vacation.
Right. Later that evening, at 10 p.m., she has a phone conversation with her boyfriend. They say their goodnights.
And as we mentioned with the algorithm, every single action generates a verifiable record.
Yes. The 6:15 p.m. call pings a specific cellular tower along her commute. The 10 p.m. call registers her device within the sector azimuth, covering her condominium complex.
The baseline is functioning perfectly.
But that 10 p.m. call is the final verified contact.
Which brings us to the morning of Tuesday, January 24. This is where we transition into the minute-by-minute breakdown of the system failure.
This is where the code stops running.
Exactly. The very first deviation from the baseline occurs between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. Jennifer was in the strict habit of texting or calling her boyfriend every single morning before she left for work.
Every single morning.
Yes. On this morning, the communication did not happen. He attempts to call her, but the call routes directly to voicemail.
And we have to look at the technology of the time. When a cell phone in 2006 routes directly to voicemail without ringing, it means the device is either completely powered down, the battery is dead, or the phone has been physically destroyed.
Right. It can no longer perform a digital handshake with the local cellular network.
Initially, her boyfriend rationalizes this, attributing it to a morning meeting she had previously mentioned.
Which is a normal human response. You try to find a logical explanation.
But the deviations rapidly compound. At 11 a.m., she is a no-call, no-show at her office.
And because of her established reliability, her employer does not wait. They do not assume she is simply running late or taking a sick day.
No. The alarm bells ring immediately. They call her parents.
The alarm is so severe that her parents instantly begin the 2-hour drive from Tampa to Orlando. While in transit, they contact the manager of her condominium complex and request a wellness check using a spare key.
And the condominium manager's observation gives investigators their second critical data point.
The status of the residence.
Right. The vehicle is missing from the parking lot, but the interior of the condominium appears completely normal. There's no forced entry at the door.
No broken lock.
No overturned furniture. Nothing to suggest a struggle. But when the family arrives between 3 p.m. and 3:15 p.m., they discover subtle physical evidence that drastically alters the entire investigative timeline.
This is a crucial pivot point in the case.
They find a wet towel in the bathroom and clothes laid out in the bedroom.
The forensic significance of that wet towel completely reshapes the case.
Because it locks in a timeline.
Exactly. Investigators can measure the moisture content of a towel. They factor in the ambient temperature and the humidity of a climate-controlled apartment to estimate an evaporation rate.
So it acts as a forensic clock?
Yes. A towel found damp at 3 p.m. proves absolutely that it was used that morning. It eliminates the theory of a nighttime home invasion or an interception between 10 p.m. and sunrise.
Because she would not have showered in the middle of the night and then vanished.
You're right. The moisture in the towel, combined with the laid-out clothing, proves she completed a significant portion of her morning routine. She slept in her bed, woke up, showered, and began preparing for her corporate job.
I keep thinking about the psychology of that specific window of time. I mean, if she showered and got dressed, she was in the transitional phase of her morning.
The most vulnerable phase.
Yes, she was moving from the safety of her locked apartment to the vulnerability of the outside world. This forces the operational theory to shift. The police concluded the abduction had to have occurred in the morning.
Likely as she was walking from her front door to her car, or at some point as she was leaving the complex to drive to work.
But if I look at the physical reality of that space, I have a hard time reconciling the lack of evidence. I mean, if there was absolutely no sign of a struggle inside the apartment and she made it out the door, how does an attacker completely overpower an adult in broad daylight in a residential complex without leaving a single trace of a struggle?
You are identifying the central mechanical paradox of this case. To understand how a human being vanishes in a populated area under morning sunlight, we have to examine the methodology of control.
Right. How do you force compliance so quietly?
An attacker in this scenario relies on either a blitz attack or severe coercion. A blitz attack requires overwhelming physical force applied instantaneously.
Like an ambush.
Yes, often a strike to the head or a chokehold that compromises the carotid artery. This renders the victim unconscious in seconds before they can cry out or mount a defense.
But a blitz attack usually leaves physical evidence, doesn't it? I mean, if a body falls to the pavement, you expect to find dropped keys, a scuff mark on a car door, or items spilled from a purse.
Exactly. The human body is heavy, and an unconscious fall generates debris and marks. And the absolute lack of that physical debris pushes behavioral analysts toward the theory of coercion.
Coercion through a weapon.
Yes, coercion involves a threat, most commonly a firearm or a knife brandished in extremely close proximity that forces total psychological and physical compliance. The attacker communicates that any attempt to flee or scream will result in immediate death.
So the victim is calculating their odds of survival in real time.
Precisely. They comply and enter a vehicle quietly, hoping to look for an avenue of escape later. The perpetrator executed this control with terrifying efficiency.
Because there was nothing. No dropped item, no sign of a scuffle on the pavement, and no witnesses who reported hearing an altercation.
The environment was completely sterile of struggle.
And because there was no physical evidence at the apartment complex, investigators were forced to expand their search radius to locate her missing black 2004 Chevy Malibu.
That vehicle was the last known extension of her physical space.
Yes, the car was the only remaining physical link to her location. And this leads us to what is arguably the most frustrating piece of surveillance evidence in modern investigative history.
It is agonizing to watch.
On Thursday, January 26 at 8:10 a.m., a tenant at a nearby apartment complex called Huntington Green Court sees Jennifer's car on the morning news.
And they make the connection.
They do. They realize the vehicle matching that exact description has been sitting abandoned in front of their apartment for several days. It is parked just 1.2 miles away from Jennifer's home.
The discovery of the vehicle yielded a critical timeline anchor. The parking lot at Huntington Green Court was surveilled by a system of hidden security cameras.
So they finally have eyes on the situation.
They do. Investigators obtained the digital recorder and found that the vehicle was parked there at approximately 12 p.m. on Tuesday, January 24th.
Wow. That is the very day she vanished, just hours after her morning routine was interrupted.
Yes. The footage clearly shows a person of interest parking the car, exiting the vehicle, and walking away.
But the mechanics of that specific security system created an almost mathematically impossible scenario. We are dealing with early digital surveillance here.
Very primitive by today's standards.
Right. To save hard drive space, the camera was programmed with a highly restricted frame rate. It snapped one photograph every 3 seconds. That is roughly 0.33 frames per second.
A very low sampling rate.
In the entire sequence where the suspect is visible walking past the wrought iron fencing of the complex, the camera captures exactly 3 frames of them. And in all 3 frames, the suspect's face is perfectly obscured by a vertical post of the complex's fencing.
We need to dissect the sheer statistical improbability of this camera timing. This was an industry standard designed to conserve server space and reduce data storage costs.
Right, because hard drives in 2006 were expensive.
Exactly. However, it inadvertently created a mathematically perfect blind spot. Let us analyze the physics of human movement in relation to this hardware.
Okay, let's break that down.
The average human walking speed is about 3.1 miles per hour, which translates to roughly 4.5 feet per second. So in a 3-second interval, a person covers approximately 13.5 feet.
So if the vertical posts of the fence are spaced in such a way, or if the angle of the camera lens creates a parallax effect that visually compresses the distance between the posts.
The geometry aligns perfectly against the investigation.
Yes, the suspect's stride length synchronized perfectly with the hardware's limitations. Every 3 seconds, as the electronic shutter opened and recorded a frame, the suspect's face was geographically positioned directly behind a post.
It is staggering. It is a statistical anomaly that actively shielded a perpetrator and hindered a major criminal investigation for decades.
And the frustration over this footage among law enforcement was profound. I mean, traditional local police enhancements entirely failed. They forwarded the digital files to the FBI headquarters in Quantico.
The premier forensic video lab in the country.
Right. And when the FBI could not extract a face, they took an unprecedented step. They brought in NASA.
That really highlights the desperation.
It does. When you have local police handing a security tape over to the space agency, you understand exactly how desperate the search for clarity had become. I mean, you were asking scientists who enhance satellite imagery of planetary surfaces to try and find a human face in a compressed JPEG image.
But even with the combined analytical power of the FBI and NASA, the fundamental limitations of the raw data could not be entirely overcome. You cannot enhance data that simply does not exist in the digital file.
If the pixels aren't there, they aren't there.
Exactly. Now, the enhancement efforts did yield a profile regarding the individual's height, utilizing photogrammetry.
Which is measuring objects within a photograph to determine dimensions.
Yes. By measuring the suspect against the known height of the car and the fence, they determined the suspects did between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 5 inches tall.
That is a fairly precise measurement.
It is. They were also able to analyze the individual's gait and the contrast of their clothing, but the primary identifying feature, the facial structure, remained a permanent void.
So, with the video failing to provide a face, investigators turned their attention to the physical car itself. They were looking for any trace evidence the suspect might have left behind in the cabin.
You always process the vehicle as a secondary crime scene.
Right. The first thing they did was deploy a specialized K-9 unit. They brought in a search dog, which tracked a scent from the abandoned car at Huntington Green Court straight back to Jennifer's apartment complex.
We need to specify the mechanics of olfactory tracking here. There's a distinct difference between a tracking dog and a trailing dog.
Oh, really? What is the difference?
A tracking dog typically works with its nose to the ground, following physical disturbances in the earth or crushed vegetation. A trailing dog, often a bloodhound, is trained to follow human scent.
Like the actual biological material.
Exactly. Specifically, the microscopic skin cells, or rafts, that constantly fall off the human body and are carried by air currents. Following a scent trail along 1.2 miles of paved urban road in the Florida climate is incredibly difficult.
Because of the weather.
Yes, heat and ultraviolet light degrade biological material rapidly.
Wow. The fact that the dog successfully followed the scent trail straight back to her specific complex is an essential piece of behavioral evidence. It suggests that after abandoning the vehicle at noon, the perpetrator walked 1.2 miles back to the victim's immediate vicinity.
Which is a highly risky move.
It is. We then look at the forensic sweep of the interior of the car. Investigators applied cyanoacrylate, which is essentially superglue fuming to reveal fingerprints. They vacuumed the upholstery for hair and fibers.
The standard comprehensive sweep.
Right. But the vehicle had been meticulously wiped down. The steering wheel, the door handles, the gear shift, all of it had been cleaned. Investigators recovered almost nothing. They found only a single latent print and a small DNA fiber.
The presence of a wiped surface tells investigators a great deal. A latent print is a fingerprint formed by the transfer of sweat and sebum from the friction ridges of the fingers onto a surface. It is invisible to the naked eye until chemically or physically developed.
So the suspect knew to wipe away their sweat and oils?
Yes. The fact that only one latent print was found indicates intentional forensic countermeasures. The perpetrator knew to remove physical identifiers.
But let us examine the inventory of the vehicle, because what was left inside versus what was taken changes the motive entirely.
This is where we separate theories of the crime.
High-value items were left inside the car. This immediately allowed detectives to rule out robbery or random carjacking. I mean, if you are stealing a car for profit, you do not leave valuables sitting on the passenger seat and then abandon the vehicle 1.2 miles away an hour later.
Precisely. We must look at the specific items that were absent. Her cell phone, her iPod, her keys, her purse, her briefcase, and the specific outfit she was wearing that morning.
All missing.
Yes. Furthermore, her bank card was never used at an ATM or a point of sale, and her cell phone was never powered back on to ping a network tower.
Why take the briefcase and the iPod but leave other valuables sitting in the car? It seems contradictory until you analyze the context of those items.
And that context points firmly toward a targeted abduction rather than a crime of financial opportunity.
How so?
When a perpetrator takes only the items that were on the victim's physical person at the exact moment of the attack, it indicates a desire for control over the victim rather than an interest in acquiring property.
Right, they aren't looking to pawn her things.
Exactly. The briefcase, the purse, the keys, and the iPod are what behavioral analysts call transitional items. These are things a person physically carries while moving from the sanctuary of their home to the utility of their vehicle.
That makes perfect sense.
Their absence confirms the attack occurred during that highly vulnerable transitional phase of her morning routine. The attacker did not search the car for valuables. They simply took the woman and whatever she happened to be holding at that precise second.
Which brings us to a fascinating contradiction in the psychological profile of the suspect. Wiping down the interior of a car demonstrates a clear, calculated level of forensic awareness.
A very methodical approach to the crime scene.
Yes, the perpetrator understood the concept of latent prints and DNA transfer. They took the time to sanitize the steering column and the door handles. But then, as the dog's scent trail indicates, they walked 1.2 miles back to the victim's apartment complex in broad daylight.
That behavior is the most baffling element of the geographical profile. You have an individual who exhibits high forensic discipline inside the isolation of the vehicle, yet displays incredibly brazen and reckless behavior outside of it.
It is a massive risk.
Walking 1.2 miles along public roads in a major metropolitan area at midday, immediately after committing an abduction, carries an extreme risk of being witnessed, intercepted by patrol officers, or recorded by other security systems.
So it suggests two possible psychological states. Either the suspect felt an overwhelming degree of confidence in their anonymity, perhaps blending in perfectly with the local demographics, or they had a compelling geographical necessity to return to that specific location.
Meaning their anchor point was there.
Yes, their own vehicle, their residence, or their workplace was inextricably linked to the victim's apartment complex.
Armed with this data, a height estimate of 5'3" to 5'5", a scent trail leading back to the condominium, and a behavioral profile showing forensic awareness coupled with geographic anchoring, the police began the rigorous process of clearing the immediate suspect pool.
They utilized the protocol of investigative concentric circles.
A very standard, very necessary procedure.
You always start with the bullseye. You begin with the people who have the most intimate access to the victim's life, schedule, and physical space. Family, friends, her current boyfriend, and an ex-boyfriend who had expressed a desire to reconcile were all intensely interrogated.
Law enforcement analyzed their phone records and verified their locations at the time of the abduction.
And they definitively cleared all of them.
Establishing impenetrable alibis for the inner circle is crucial. It legally and procedurally forces the investigation into the next tier of contacts. You eliminate the intimate partners, and you move to the professional acquaintances.
That next tier included her workplace. Her office, computer, and communications were subjected to forensic examination. Investigators discovered a point of friction.
A managerial conflict.
Yes. A manager at her firm had made unwanted romantic advances toward her. She had actively refused these advances, citing a strict, documented personal stance against engaging in workplace relationships.
Detectives immediately recognized this as a potential motive regarding rejection and control.
They interviewed this manager multiple times, analyzing his timeline for Tuesday morning, but ultimately his alibi held up to scrutiny and he was completely ruled out as a suspect.
Once the professional and personal circles are cleared, investigators must shift their focus to environmental factors. They look at the geography of the victim's daily life.
And her geography was highly unusual at the time.
It was. At the time of her disappearance, Jennifer's condominium complex was undergoing a massive expansion and renovation project. This introduced a highly significant variable into her daily environment.
A large crew of construction laborers operating directly outside her front door. I want you to consider the psychological impact of living inside a construction zone.
The noise, the constant presence of strangers.
Exactly. Jennifer had actively complained to her family about her living situation. She reported being harassed, catcalled, and whistled at by the workers as she moved between her car and her apartment. It created a highly uncomfortable environment.
A sense of hypervigilance in her own home.
Yes. Her home, which should have been her sanctuary, was surrounded by a daily gauntlet she had to walk through just to get to her car.
From a purely investigative standpoint, the construction site presented catastrophic logistical hurdles.
How do you even begin to investigate a site like that?
It is incredibly difficult. The environment of a major residential build is inherently transient. You have primary contractors, subcontractors, day laborers, and delivery drivers moving in and out of the complex hourly.
A constantly shifting population.
Yes. Furthermore, many of the workers on the site were non-English speaking, and many were paid in cash. This meant there was no formal paper trail, no W-2 forms, and no permanent addresses on file.
So when investigators attempt to build a timeline in that environment, they hit a brick wall.
A literal and figurative wall.
The language barriers prevented law enforcement from conducting the comprehensive, nuanced interrogations required to detect deception. You cannot easily establish a reliable baseline of communication through a translator.
Especially when verifying alibis.
Right. Cross-referencing statements among a transient workforce that lacks formal documentation becomes exceptionally difficult. It creates a structural void where leads simply evaporate.
The harassment she reported is a documented clinical fact of the case. While it establishes that she lived in a hostile environmental factor, the sheer logistical impossibility of investigating hundreds of undocumented laborers left those questions permanently unresolved.
So, with the immediate circle cleared, the workplace cleared, and the construction site leads stymied by these logistical barriers, The investigation entered a grueling holding pattern.
The momentum just stops.
The initial momentum of the first 48 hours dissipated. This stagnation forced the Kesse family to take extraordinary long-term measures to keep the search active and funded.
They had to step in where the system stalled.
By May 2007, her employer offered a $1 million reward, though it came with the stipulation that she had to be found alive. Central Florida Crime Line also offered a $5,000 reward for actionable information.
But the impact of this case extended far beyond financial incentives and billboards.
Right, because this case dragged on so painfully long and the initial police response was hampered by outdated protocols, the family suffering actually forced the state of Florida to entirely rewrite the law on how they handle missing adults.
The endurance of this investigation prompted systemic legislative change.
It did. On May 2, 2008, the Florida House of Representatives unanimously passed Senate Bill 502, officially known as the Jennifer Kesse and Tiffany Sessions Missing Persons Act.
We need to analyze exactly what that legislation changed.
Please walk us through it.
Prior to 2008, if an adult went missing, law enforcement agencies operated under the automatic assumption of voluntary departure. There were mandatory waiting periods before an adult could be officially entered into the National Crime Information Center, or NCIC, database.
Which means local police weren't sharing data nationally.
Exactly. This delay often meant that crucial early search efforts, the deployment of dogs, the requesting of cellular tower dumps, the securing of surveillance footage before it was overwritten, simply did not happen in the first 24 hours.
Because they were legally waiting to see if the person just came back.
Right. Senate Bill 502 fundamentally reformed those procedures. It removed the waiting periods and mandated immediate aggressive action by law enforcement when any adult disappears under suspicious circumstances.
So even in her physical absence, Jennifer's case changed the fundamental legal code of Florida. It ensured that future investigations would not lose those vital early hours to bureaucratic assumptions.
It is a massive legacy.
It is. But while the law changed, her specific case remained unsolved. By June 2010, the jurisdictional authority shifted when the FBI formally took over the case from the Orlando Police Department.
The FBI brings federal resources, national database access, and specialized behavioral analysis units.
But even with federal involvement, the years continued to pass without a resolution.
The holding pattern became so entrenched that it led to an unprecedented legal confrontation.
This part is fascinating. Between 2018 and 2019, the Kesse family took a step that is almost unheard of in the true crime sphere. They sued the Orlando Police Department.
It is exceptionally rare for a victim's family to take civil action against the investigating agency.
Imagine reaching a point of such profound frustration that you have to hire attorneys to sue your own local police department just to get a look at the files they have kept locked away for over a decade. The legal tension here is massive.
It involves the collision of two legal principles. On one side, you have the Freedom of Information Act and state sunshine laws designed to make government records public.
Transparency laws.
Right. On the other side, law enforcement agencies heavily guard case files under the active criminal intelligence exemption.
Because they don't want to compromise the case.
Yes. They argue that releasing specific forensic details or unredacted interviews could compromise future prosecutions or allow a suspect to manipulate evidence.
Which makes sense in theory. But conversely, the family argued that the investigation had entirely stagnated. They asserted they had a fundamental right to access the data so they could employ private investigative resources.
They wanted to bring in outside forensic experts and retired detectives to review the work.
The litigation was arduous, but it resulted in a settlement in March 2019, where the family successfully secured 16,000 pages of investigative records.
An incredible volume of data.
For years, those 16,000 pages sat in the family's hands. They scrutinized every single police report, every witness interview, and every forensic log. They essentially ran a parallel investigation from their living room.
But the landscape of the investigation shifted massively again in December 2022.
It did. The case was officially transferred back to the state level, specifically to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's Cold Case Unit.
The FDLE committed to a total ground-up review. They promised to re-interview individuals and, crucially, to retest the physical evidence.
Why is retesting so important after all that time?
That commitment to retest the physical evidence is the absolute pivot point of modern forensic science. Over 2 decades, the capacity to isolate, amplify, and sequence microscopic biological material has evolved exponentially.
The science just got better.
Much better. The FDLE's involvement signaled a critical transition. moving away from merely reading historical reports and moving toward applying contemporary scientific methodologies to preserved physical artifacts.
Which brings us to the most significant breakthroughs in the entire two-decade history of the case. On May 20, 2025, a date that would have been Jennifer's 44th birthday, the FDLE made a major public announcement.
They stated they had completed the review of the thousands of documents and had conducted fresh interviews with 45 people.
That is a massive undertaking, and they announced they had identified several persons of interest. Most importantly, they officially declared the case is no longer considered cold. It is an active, dynamic investigation.
And they also revealed a fascinating technological leap. Artificial intelligence is currently being utilized to analyze that deeply frustrating 3-second interval security footage from 2006.
The footage that NASA couldn't even fix.
Exactly. The application of artificial intelligence to 20-year-old surveillance footage represents a massive technological paradigm shift.
Yeah.
When NASA attempted to enhance the video in 2006, they were limited to sharpening the pixels that were already there.
Just working with the existing data.
Right. They could adjust contrast and brightness, but they could not create data. Modern AI algorithms operate differently. They do not just sharpen. They utilize predictive modeling.
How does that work on a blocked face?
Well, AI can analyze subpixel variations, meaning it looks at the microscopic gradient of color bleed across the edge of the fence post that is obscuring the suspect's face.
Oh, wow.
By analyzing millions of human faces, the AI can extrapolate lighting conditions, shadow depth, and biological symmetry to computationally reconstruct the obscured facial geometry.
That is staggering. The idea that a computer program can essentially see around a physical object by analyzing the pixels next to it changes the entire field of digital forensics. What was once considered a mathematical blind spot may now be entirely solvable through algorithmic rendering.
It is a complete game changer.
But the breakthroughs did not stop with the video. On October 21st, 2025, her father, Drew Kesse, made an announcement that completely alters the physical parameters of the case. He stated that the FDLE had found new DNA on previously untested evidence.
We must pause to examine the implications of that statement. The revelation that biological material was secured from the crime scene or the vehicle but remained untested for 2 decades highlights a critical failure in the initial triage of evidence back in 2006.
It means it was just sitting in a box.
Yes. The original local police claimed the only DNA found was on the steering wheel. To learn that other items were logged into an evidence locker but never swabbed or sequenced is deeply concerning regarding the early handling of the investigation.
However, looking at it from a contemporary standpoint, the discovery of new DNA is incredibly hopeful. It means the perpetrator left a biological anchor behind. And Drew Kesse specifically noted that because of this new DNA, the suspect pool has now been greatly reduced.
This is where advancements in touch DNA technology become paramount. In 2006, DNA testing required a relatively large sample, a visible drop of blood or a measurable amount of saliva.
Something tangible you could see.
Right. Today, forensic laboratories can generate a full genetic profile from a handful of discarded epithelial skin cells left behind by mere seconds of physical contact.
So just brushing against a fabric.
Exactly. If a suspect touched a seatbelt, a door handle, or an item of clothing, they left their genetic code. When you combine this objective genetic matching capability with a reduced suspect pool, the investigation moves out of the realm of theoretical profiling and into the realm of absolute biological certainty.
The momentum surrounding these 2025 discoveries is profound. It has triggered a massive renewal of media impact, including the announcement of a highly anticipated documentary series set for release in early 2026.
The public interest is surging again.
The resilience of the Kesse family is absolute. Because they refused to accept the initial theories, because they successfully fought a legal battle for those 16,000 pages, and because they continually demanded contemporary scientific scrutiny, we are closer now to identifying the suspect than at any point since January 2006.
This case serves as a masterclass in the enduring nature of forensic science. It proves a fundamental truth. Physical evidence never truly expires.
It just waits.
Yes, a latent print, a microscopic skin cell, a digital frame of surveillance video, they hold the answers perfectly preserved. It is only our human capacity to read that evidence that lags behind. The evidence simply waits patiently for technology to catch up.
When you look at all the threads we have examined today, the tightly structured algorithm of her daily routine, the physics of a wet towel signaling a morning abduction, the legislative changes that completely reformed missing persons protocols in Florida, and the brand new touch DNA evidence, you see a picture of an investigation that simply refused to remain dormant.
It is actively evolving.
It is. Multiple international agencies, including Interpol and the FBI, still consider her actively missing and endangered.
There is a final, chilling mechanical element to consider.
What is that?
The perpetrator exhibited the terrifying confidence to walk 1.2 miles back to the condominium complex in broad daylight. For 2 decades, they successfully evaded justice based almost entirely on a 3-second technological anomaly, a slow camera shutter.
Just sheer luck.
But with the synthesis of contemporary touch DNA analysis and advanced artificial intelligence reconstructing that footage, that 3-second blind spot is rapidly closing. The exact tools the perpetrator relied on for anonymity are now the precise mechanisms dismantling it.
And it raises a much larger, lingering question for you to consider. If advanced DNA sequencing and AI can suddenly unlock a 20-year-old mystery, we have to consider the sheer volume of untested physical evidence currently sitting in municipal evidence lockers nationwide. How many other perfect crimes are only perfect because the physical evidence is trapped in a backlog, quietly waiting for the day the science finally catches up to the suspect?
It is a reality that should make every cold case perpetrator very nervous.
Thanks for listening.